So our next speaker, I'm really delighted that Iona's here and is going to speak to us. My links with Iona go back a long way. She's written for the BMJ, she chaired our ethics committee, and she's the Royal College of General Practitioners' most recent former president. She's a woman of enormous intellect. She writes fantastically well on a range of topics, so much so that whenever I used to want to mention her columns in my editor's choice column, I just found myself wanting to quote the entire thing, so it was rather problematic. But anyway, I know Iona has been a fantastic advocate, very intelligent, thoughtful, and with her clinical background, completely appropriately concerned about overdiagnosis and overtreatment, so she's going to tell us what we will do. Where is Iona? Here she is.
Thank you very much. I'm also in a foreign country. How do you make it come up on the screen? Session, which one are we on? 6 Yes. Yes, where's that? Thank you. Really? No, that's not the beginning. I mean, there is the beginning. Sorry. So over the past 2 days, we've heard so much about the pervasiveness of overdiagnosis and overtreatment, and about how deeply embedded it's become in healthcare systems around the world. Underpinned, I think my language is slightly more moderate than Peter, but I'm probably saying exactly the same thing. Underpinned by webs of financial imperatives and conflicts of interest, permeating and polluting the pharmaceutical and medical technology industries, medical research and regulatory bodies, clinical work, payment systems, guideline production, and national healthcare systems. What can, let alone will, we do about it? My argument is that the responses will necessarily be driven by ethics and politics, because they are the only defences that we have ever had to confront the abuse of power and money to the detriment of the weak and vulnerable. The whole discipline of medicine, every one of us, whatever our connection to medicine, has colluded in a wider societal project that seeks technical solutions for the age-old existential problems posed by the finitude of life and the inevitability of aging, loss, and death. And so often, it is not knowledge that we lack. What is missing is the courage to understand what we know and to draw conclusions. The only solutions to these profound existential problems that have challenged humanity since the beginning of time are to be found in courage and endurance and acceptance of the limits of life. They are to be found in thinking differently and more deeply. And I think one of the wonderful things about this conference is that I think we've been trying to do that. I think we have really been trying to do that. Ray's article about the expanded definition of chronic kidney disease in last month's BMJ triggered a typical example of the sort of thinking that is everywhere within medical discourse and rapidly spreading beyond medicine. A rapid response was submitted from Koresh and colleagues. Now, Joseph Koresh is a highly esteemed professor of epidemiology at Johns Hopkins, and his very lengthy response included this sentence: "We find the attitude that disease in older people should be ignored and untreated to be disturbing." Now, I find it disturbing on at least 3 counts, this sentence. Firstly, there was no such attitude in the original paper. I looked very carefully and I really could not find it. Secondly, a reduced estimated glomerular filtration rate is not a disease. It's a risk factor. And thirdly, and for me most importantly, this completely ignores the realities of normal physiological aging, a process in which I am well embarked. It is surely time that we stopped trying to correct every biometric parameter to the norms of younger adults. I don't want to be 24 again, thank you very much. I'm quite happy. Don't worry, be happy. And I don't want my biometrics to look like a 24-year-old either. But this approach to numbers is becoming more and more pervasive, and it's resulting in the over-medicating, the extraordinary degree of over-medicating of a whole generation of older people, with all the adverse effects on the quality of life that polypharmacy creates. At every level, this is a story of unsustainable greed. It's the greed of those living in the richer countries of the world for ever greater longevity, and most particularly, it's the greed that drives the commercial imperatives of the pharmaceutical and the medical technology industries, in which I think we have to include ourselves as physicians. The 2012 World Health Organization Global Health Expenditure Atlas reports that the OECD countries consume more than 80% of the world's healthcare resources, but experience less than 10% of the world's disability-adjusted life years. This must be untenable in terms of both global justice and the world's capacity. And the problem is that where the OECD countries lead, the rest of the world tends to try and follow, or even to be pushed to follow. There are at least 3 serious ethical implications. The first is the extent of harm to individuals caused by being labelled as being at risk or as having a disease based entirely on numbers and the unnecessary fear that this can engender. Because that in itself undermines health and well-being. And the second concerns the potential of overdiagnosis and overtreatment to render healthcare systems founded on social solidarity unviable because of the escalating costs involved. And I think we're seeing that happening across Europe. And we're also seeing how closely linked underdiagnosis and overdiagnosis are. Because if you widen the pool of a disease, what you do is take resources away from those who are most seriously affected. Is that really what we want to be doing in medicine? And the third thing is the marginalization, the way biotechnical activity, which is what this is all about, marginalizes and obscures the socioeconomic causes of ill health in the lack of justice within our society. So what of politics? Back in 1964, you can tell I am well into the aging process, this German-American political theorist, Herbert Marcuse, wrote, "Totalitarian is not only a terroristic political coordination of society, but also a non-terroristic economic technical coordination which operates through the manipulation of needs by vested interests." This is what large tracts of our healthcare systems have become, a non-terroristic economic technical coordination which operates through the manipulation of needs by vested interests. It's a perfect description. The fears of politicians, practitioners, and the public, and the enduring human craving for a predictable future are making us all into willing participants. Reviewing George Orwell's 1984, in a review written in 1949, this wonderful chain-smoking American critic, Lionel Trilling, wrote about George Orwell. He is saying, indeed, something no less comprehensive than this, that Russia, with its idealistic social revolution now developed into a police state, is but the image of the impending future, and that the ultimate threat to human freedom may well come from a similar and even more massive development of the social idealism of our democratic culture. Arguably, the current ascendancy of medical technology is just such a manifestation of social idealism. War is peace, ignorance is strength, freedom is slavery, and now we have the latest example of Orwellian doublespeak, disease is health. Trilling continues, the essential point of 1984 is just this, the danger of the ultimate and absolute power which the mind can develop when it frees itself from conditions, from the bondage of things and history. The sorts of measurements which underpin the imperatives of contemporary medicine, blood pressure, serum cholesterol, bone density, PHQ-9 depression score, body mass index, estimated glomerular filtration rate, just to mention a few, are all held to be universally applicable, whatever the circumstance of the individual life to which they are applied. They are, in Trilling's words, freed from conditions, and therefore they are dangerous. This kind of utilitarian medicine, which treats every individual as identical, can very easily erode the stature and autonomy of patients. More than 20 years ago, David Metcalfe warned general practitioners in the UK. The WHO definition of health as complete physical, social, and psychological well-being says something that we must acknowledge. It is about a person's potential for living, which is a matter of autonomy and personal space, of having room to make choices. These are the concerns of general practice because our professional objectives are wider than the diagnosis and treatment of disease, but we too need to be careful, lest diagnostic or therapeutic exuberance in the individual case blinds us to our patients' needs for space and stature. How much more important is that warning today? We are developing a culture of conformity which pays lip service to autonomy and choice, but within which the individual is only really free to make the choice which is approved by the state. It is assumed that once the healthy choice is pointed out, everyone will select it, and no account is taken of the very differing circumstances and aspirations of different people's lives. It's become difficult to question the means because the ends of curing and preventing disease is so obviously worthy. Nonetheless, the means are damaging, not least because they are so unidimensional and because they propagate such an intensely normative view of what it means to be healthy and indeed what human life should be. We all need to urgently rediscover an acute sense of waste as a moral and political issue. Far too much that we do is wasteful, futile, and harmful. It is not knowledge that we lack. What is missing is the courage to understand what we know and to draw conclusions. The great American thinker William James declared that doubt and hope are sisters. In our doubt lies our hope. Unless we are prepared to doubt the truth of existing explanations, we will never look for better ones that could bring us hope. So let's finally remember Kierkegaard. I have a thing about stamps. And Kierkegaard wrote, "It is quite true what philosophy says, that life must be understood backwards. But then one forgets the other principle, that it must be lived forwards. Life is lived forwards but understood backwards. We always act in advance of our understanding. We are taught as medical students and learn to expect benefits from our interventions. We need to be much, much more rigorous in our expectation of foreseeable harms and to teach our students to look always for the possibility of harm alongside that of benefit. Much of what we regard as standard, even excellent practice today, will, I am sure, eventually be consigned to what the novelist Amitav Ghosh describes as medicine's vast graveyard of discredited speculations. In a world where it has become acceptable to treat risk factors, however weak, as diseases in their own right, we must and will learn to resist overdiagnosis. And perhaps one of the best places for us to begin is in remembering what James McCormick wrote in The Lancet nearly 20 years ago. Health promotion falls far short of meeting the ethical imperatives for screening procedures and moreover diminishes health and wastes resources. General practitioners, this is where I chime with Peter, would do better to encourage people to lead lives of modified hedonism so that they may enjoy in the full the only life that they are ever likely to have. No one was listening then. Let's make sure they're listening now. And lastly, a little bit of advertising for our workshop immediately after this session on how we could make guidelines help us in that process. Thank you very much.
That's what I call a sitting ovation. Iona, marvellous.